examPAL, and today we're going to talk about the ultimate GMAT study plan. But before we do, I want to make sure you guys can hear me so that I don't spend an hour talking to myself. So if one or two of you could just tell me in the chat, which you'll see on the right side of your screen, that you can hear me, that would be great. And once we get that out of the way, we'll hop in and start talking about our study plan. So, okay, great. Two people say they can hear me. Good to know. Thank you, guys. So now that I've introduced you to the chat function, I'll just say feel free to use it. Thank you, Monica, for telling me. Thank you, Malkush. I hope I said that right. Thank you, Hirai. All right, great. So that means that this is working. That's good news. And feel free to use the chat as we move along. I'll try and answer as I progress, but if I don't have enough time or something like that, that's fine. I'll try and get to it in the end. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Nayeli. All right. So this is me on the screen. My name is Dave, and I'm a senior tutor here at examPAL. And in today's webinar, we're going to talk about how to build a study plan that will help you reach your highest score faster. And before we do that, I want to just briefly, for a few minutes, talk about who we at examPAL are and what we can do for you. So if you've already signed up, you already have full access to our video lessons, and you probably know that our team is there to answer any questions you may have at any hour. So feel free to use that. But what are we? What is examPAL? So we started examPAL as a group of teachers, GMAT prep teachers, who realized that students all over the world are paying too much, and they're doing it for not the best product. And the thing is, they only realize that they're getting the best product after they complete their preparation, which is to say, too late. So what is it they're missing, most of these students? Well, are you familiar with the feeling when someone explains something and you just don't get it? I think we probably all are, right? Some of us maybe more often, but we all know this feeling. So imagine what it's like to prepare for an admission test, such as the GMAT, and the questions in these tests can have up to 10 different possible solution paths. And all you need to do is to find the fastest one. Okay? So the thing is that students all over the world are simply bombarded with thousands of practice questions, tips, tricks, and shticks, which are there to help everyone in the exact same way. However, the thing is, there's no such thing as the explanation. Okay, I've personally taught lots of students over the years, and to me, when a novice teacher comes up to me and asks, you know, how do you explain this question? My answer is to whom? How to explain it to whom? And that's examPAL in a nutshell. We ask, to whom are we explaining? We don't just explain what makes the correct answer correct, but we first ask ourselves, who are you? Who is the student who's using it? So what does that mean? Well, we do three things that no one else, as far as we know, does. We study the way you think. Okay, using the practice technology, we get input on what you think you actually solve it. Second thing is we study the effectiveness of all the different possible solution strategies for every question, right? And your goal as a student is to be fast and correct, and our goal is to find the fastest way based on how people actually do. And third, putting these things together, using this information, we find the fastest and the best way to solve each question. And when I say the best, I mean the best for you. And this is something that not even private tutors can really do, right? A private tutor is with you once a week or once a day, however often you meet with them, but we're with you with any question, from the basics to the hardest ones. And when examPAL offers you a solution strategy, we're not guessing, we're actually measuring. that it works. So just to kind of summarize the problem that we are out to solve, the pain, if you will. So test takers spend a lot of time, a lot of money preparing for admission tests, only to realize that the physical courses, the actual in-the-life courses they're taking are frustrating, because as we said, there can be lots of different ways to solve each question, and the teacher's only going to explain one or two of them. How do you find the one that's best for you? These courses are often also ineffective because the biggest enemy that we have in these tests is time. And a one-size-fits-all course might tell you which answer is right, but it won't tell you the way that's most effective for you to save time. And finally, the courses are time-consuming. You're solving things that are relevant to other students, not to you. And you're solving thousands of questions, some of which are too easy for you, and some of which are maybe too hard. And you're learning all kinds of tips that aren't relevant to you. You really should focus on what you need. So we see ourselves as actually leading a far greater revolution here in the field of education in general, and that's understanding of what preparing for these tests really means. So these tests are very different than the ones you've had in high school. The GMAT isn't about knowledge. What the GMAT is about is a skill which we call cognitive flexibility. Now, what is this rather kind of pompous, perhaps, term mean? It means your ability to change your set of tools very quickly according to the changes in the data that you're getting. And this is what we need on the GMAT, because on one question we have algebra, then we go to geometry, then word problems, then a data sufficiency question. It all changes very quickly. So what we try to do is not just provide you with the knowledge you need for the test, but rather to train you to find the fastest way to solve each question. So how do we do that, right? I've said a lot of great things about what our goal is, but how do we actually do that? So the real quick peek behind the scenes. Our process starts with interactive video lessons. You watch videos, and while you're studying the course, our course is studying you, because these lessons are interactive. They have questions interspersed between them. So the lessons include, they start us off with an introduction, which gives you all the basic tools you need, formulas, logic, all that. And from there on, we move to lesson videos, in which we demonstrate how different questions from the test can be solved using different approaches. Then we move on to our special sauce, our practice. And each practice session starts with a diagnostic phase. So as we said, we found that there are a lot of different ways to solve a question, but they can be divided, all these different tools, into three general strategies: precise, alternative, and logical, which is the PAL in examPAL. So in the diagnostic phase, what we do is analyze how well you're using each strategy. For example, the question you see on the screen here, 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y, solved logically by figuring out the ratio between the numerator and the denominator. It can be solved precisely by simplifying the algebraic expression, or it can be solved alternatively by using simple numbers, plugging in, say, x equals 1 and y equals 2. Any one of these tools will get us to the answer. And in the diagnostic phase, we quickly learn what your level is in implementing each of these tools. And we do that by actually studying your information. Then comes the improvement phase. Oh, by the way, so here you see here the different solution tools to solve this question. So then we come to the improvement phase, in which we focus on your level and we find the best questions for you to solve in order to improve your skills. This means we're not just, it is more than being adaptive in the sense that the GMAT is adaptive, because we think that simply giving you easier or harder questions won't do the trick. What we do is we find out which tools work best for you and what were the reasons for your mistakes. And we do that by getting feedback from you after your questions. What were the tools you used, and why did you make mistakes when you did make them? And then we come to the best part. In the optimization phase, both the practice questions and the solution strategies are chosen so as to match your own personal needs. For example, in this example here, the system found 4 solution strategies and ranked them in order of relevance for you. So in professional terms, what we're doing here is called an open, semi-supervised recommendation system. What this means In other words, we're moving from machine learning to machine teaching, from deep learning to deep teaching. We're scanning through the ideas of others in order to find the one that's the easiest for you to understand and implement. Now, all this we do using data from our over 50,000 students from 156 countries, and this helps us teach you, okay? Our students teach us how to teach them, and it works. The effect is proven, and it's amazing. Our average user reaches his highest possible level with segments of just 30 questions per topic. And we've gotten a bunch of awards and recognition for education, innovation, and AI. And students are very happy with us. You can take a look if you want. But last but not least, and this is the last thing I'm going to say on this topic, is that we give you a real success guarantee. This is 70 points success guarantee in the GMAT. And I say real because we're not one of the places where improvement is measured relative to a mock test you've done when you have no clue what you're doing. If you have an official previous score you're not satisfied with, we can guarantee you're going to improve it significantly. So bottom line, this goes to say that this is your chance to take us up on an offer, a 2019 bundle, and save 25% on any GMAT course and get. So stick around to the end of our session here today, and in the end I'm going to give you guys a coupon code to use to utilize this and take me up on my offer. So I hope that taught you a little bit about who we are, and now without further ado, let's start talking about building a study plan. All right, so when we're talking about what your study plan should look like, the first thing we're going to be talking about is how long you should be studying for. And this question, in turn, is also made up of two questions. The first of which is how much should you study in total? How many hours should you allocate to sitting on your desk and studying? The second question we're going to tackle is over how long a period, right? How many weeks or months should you start your study plan before taking the test? So we're going to answer the first question right now, and then we're going to present several different answers for the second one throughout this webinar because it's a little bit more complex. So let's actually start with some concrete data to answer this. In one of our recent webinars, we had one of the GMAC's senior directors. The GMAC is the organization that administers the test. And we did a webinar together with him, and he shared the following data with us. You can see here the median number of hours of preparation by GMAT score. And on the right side, you can see how many hours. Actually, this is the same data, but it's just visualized somewhat differently. Now, notice the short sentence in the bottom right corner. Okay, those who score at least 600 study an average of 122 hours. And now look at the left side and note how the median number of hours seems to grow in accordance, or at least in correlation to the score the test takers got. Okay, a lot of the 700 scorers are retakers, and naturally they need less time for preparation, but still we see this nice kind of gradual incline. So we recommend studying 100 to 120 hours in total. And we recommend adding another 30 hours if you're a non-native English speaker. Okay, and before, the middle graph we had there gives us a clue as to why. When you see how much people study across the world, we see more study in Asia, for example, where most people, English is not their first language. So all of this being said, studying over 100 hours, of course, doesn't guarantee you're going to score 600 or 700 or anything, really. You know, if you sit in front of a piece of paper for 100 hours, you're not going to get anywhere. As in many things in life, it's not just the quantity, but it's also the quality of what we do with the quantity. So the real question that we're going to determine if this is enough or not enough is how you spend these 100 or so hours. And this is really what we're going to discuss at length in the hour we have together. So this brings us to our second and slightly more complicated question, which is over how long a period should you spread your studies? In other words, how long before you take the exam should you start studying? So the real answer to this is it depends. The main factor which shapes the answer to this question is how much time do you have? Can you devote all of your time to studying? Or is studying something that you're going to be doing alongside a lot of other stuff? So all things being equal, though, we are going to give you an answer to this, okay? We recommend 6 to 8 weeks as the recommended amount of time. The reason is this is not too short, okay? This gives you enough time to both study and also to breathe a little, so you don't have to get overly stressed. But on the other hand, it's also not too long. You're not going to have enough time to start forgetting material which you learned at the beginning, or become exhausted from months of putting your life on hold and preparing for the test. So let's put it this way. If fitting in 100 to 120 hours is possible for you, and it should be even for working people who can devote, say, their evenings and weekends to study, this is the recommended amount of time. And to give you an example, this plan, this amount of time, 6 to 8 weeks, is perfect for someone who's anything like John Doe. And John Doe has the following characteristics. Okay, he's a first-time GMAT taker, meaning his study plan has to start from scratch. He's a native English speaker, so that means he doesn't have to put an emphasis on vocabulary and memorization study, but he should still make sure to read the news every day in the morning and read a novel at night in order to work on optimizing his reading pace. Also, he should leave enough time to go over all the grammatical rules and memorize them, which is something that a lot of times native speakers actually neglect doing, and when they do that, they pay the price, so you should do that. So John also works a 9-to-5 job, which means his study time will be in the evenings and on the weekends, and he can comfortably schedule about an hour and a half of study in the evenings during the weekdays and another 4 hours on the weekend. Okay? So in terms of material, John doesn't really know his strengths or the weaknesses right now, and he won't know them until he really starts studying. But he does know that he's naturally good at quantitative topics, and he's more concerned about the verbal section of the exam. So this plan is flexible enough to suit someone who has a few constraints during this time period as well, okay? So John, for example, on the one hand, he can take a week off before the exam to really cram, but on the other hand, 3 weeks before the exam, he has to go away for a 5-day business trip during which he's not going to be able to look at the GMAT at all. And also, he's planning a vacation for his birthday on one weekend earlier on. The point I'm trying to make here, if I've gotten you maybe a little bit confused in all the weeds of this specific example of John Doe, the point is, of course, not that this plan is only good for someone with these specific characteristics and constraints, but in general, that it can work for anyone who has some constraints, as long as the constraints are more or less on the level I just described, which is to say, about a week out of the 60 or so days that cannot be devoted to study. If we're looking at more than a week, if it's more like 2 weeks, then probably we should be looking at a longer study plan. But if it's at this ballpark, then this is the right study plan, this 2-month study plan. Okay? So building a good study plan for a longer 3 months or shorter 1 month period of time is possible, and we're going to talk about how to do it, but it's less ideal. Okay? So what we're going to do is discuss now shortly what a 2-month study plan looks like in detail, and then proceed to also outline what a 1 month and a 3-month study plan look like, how they differ from the 2-month one. Okay, obviously not all of us, or most of us even, are not going to have exactly 1, 2, or 3 months, but rather something in between one of them, in between 1 or 2, or 2 and 3. And that's fine. And if that's the case, then just we should build a plan that's some combination of the plans we're about to present. All right? I hope that's all clear. As I said before, I just want to stress this again. Feel free to ask me questions throughout in the chat. That way, I'll be able to answer the specific person who asked it, and also all the other people who were maybe thinking the same question but didn't ask. And also, I'll feel that we're actually having an interactive webinar, which I like doing. So, do we have any daily study plan templates? Yeah. Well, let's. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the rest of this webinar. Really, from now on, is a general template of what the study plan looks like in general, and we also are going to talk about the micro level of every few days. So keep tight. All right, so if you're a retaker of the test, but thank you for asking, and feel free to ask more questions, guys. So if you're retaking the test, everything that follows applies to you as well. However, before you start the study plan, what you should do is take a day or two to debrief, by which I mean analyze your performance up till now and ask yourself what worked well and what, on the other hand, went wrong. And what does it mean that you should work on? Okay, so if you felt that you didn't know the material well enough, then you have to go back to the basics and relearn it, because it's obviously simply essential to have a firm grasp on the fundamentals. If you ran out of time during the test, then this means that at least one of the things you need to do is make a detailed plan for the test and work on your time management, which is a skill in and of itself. If you felt like you made so-called dumb mistakes that, you know, once you see them, you're like, oh, that doesn't really count as a mistake. I knew that. I just goofed, screwed up. Then you need to take these mistakes seriously. You need to think of what can make you not repeat these mistakes, such as writing on your scratch pad, remembering to look at each data sufficiency statement separately, and crossing out answers one by one, etc. And one last thing you might want to do is perhaps order an enhanced score report from the GMAT for a detailed analysis of your performance. So remember, the first rule for retakers is that improving means doing everything you already did, but doing it better. So don't assume there's certain topics that you can skip altogether, but you may assume that it will take you less time than during your first preparation, as long as it was recently. Sujoy asks how much average time is needed for Quant. So we'll get to that in a minute, or we'll touch upon it briefly. In general, we recommend more time for Quant, not because it's more important and not because most people are worse at it, but simply because the Quant has more material. It has more sections in it. It has more different types of topics. It's more varied. And if you go to examPAL.com to our course, you'll see that for this reason, our Quant course simply has more chapters in it. Again, not because it's more important, but because to be good at Quant, you have to simultaneously be good at a lot of different things. So no, the verbal, well, first of all, verbal doesn't have a higher weightage. Verbal and Quant have the same weightage. But again, I'm not saying the Quant has a higher weightage. I'm saying that to be good at Quant, we need to study more things. And for this reason, most of us should spend more time on Quant, even though they both have the same, they're both important in the same amount to most of us. Anyway, so without further ado, let's get into the weeds and talk about what a 2-month study plan actually looks like. So as I stated before, the operative word in 2-month study plan is plan, meaning our goal is to know what we're doing for every day for the next 60 days, okay? And this may sound ambitious, but let's break it down into 3 simple tasks. So the first one is ask yourself, what are all the non-GMAT things you have to do over the next 60 days? And when you do this, be thorough. Okay, often we're overly optimistic about how much study time we're actually going to have. We say to ourselves, oh, you know, tomorrow I'm going to study for 14 hours. And we forget that we actually have to do things like eat and sleep and go to the bathroom and maybe even go outside for a little bit. So try and be realistic, or if you like, be pessimistic. Take into account all the things that might keep you away from your beloved studies, and try and budget them. And in general, in total, you should budget, as we already said, 100 to 120 hours, or 130 to 150 if you're a non-native English speaker. And if you are, then memorizing grammatical rules is going to take you a little bit more time, which is what you're going to use these extra 30 hours for. Now, at this point, this is kind of the cutoff for you to decide whether the 2-month plan is for you or not. If you start budgeting and you see you can't fit in these 100, 120 hours, 130, 150 hours in 2 months, there just isn't enough time, then this is the point where you should skip over and go for the 90-day plan, which I'm going to talk about soon. But again, most of you will be able to, even if you're working full-time job, you should be able to budget 100 to 120 hours in 2 months. So the next thing to do is to schedule specific times of day for studying when you're both available and you're realistically able to focus. Okay, it doesn't really do much good to budget 4 hours of studying late at night if you're going to be completely wiped out from a long day of work. So that, again, this is something that obviously when I say it, it sounds obvious, but you'll be surprised how many people, when we build a schedule, they're kind of too optimistic and they say to ourselves, yeah, from 9 o'clock to 1 a.m. I'm gonna really kill the triangles. I'm gonna crush it. And that's not what happens. You're tired. So now that we know when we'll study, let's talk about what we're gonna study and how we're gonna spend our time. So your first more or less 47 days are gonna be made up of subject review and practice. And the first thing that we need to do is make a list of all the GMAT topics, not just verbal and quant, but all of the many subtopics which make up these sections as well, especially the quant section, which, as I mentioned, has more subsections. So on examPAL.com, this is automatic because our course is built up of all the relevant subtopics, and there's a trail, so you tackle them one by one. As you can see here, integers and then geometry basics and so on and so forth. So once you know all there is to study, what you're going to do is plan a 2-day mini schedule for each subject that looks like this. Okay? On the first day, you're going to review the fundamental material. So with examPAL, this means watching the intro video, which I mentioned in the beginning first, in order to make sure that you know the basic rules and the terminology. And then we're going to move on and watch the lesson video in order to experience real test questions and refine our answer strategies. Now, while we're watching, we're not just passively watching, but we should be compiling 2 separate lists, one of which is a summary of the material, which is going to help us absorb the subject matter. And another one is a list of practical tips for question solving, which was what the lesson videos are all about. The lesson videos are giving you tips, and you should be writing down the ones that seem like they're really helpful to you. On the second day, we're going to move and solve subject-related questions. And on examPAL, this means we're going to complete the practice phase, the diagnostic, improvement, and optimization phases. And after each section of practice, we're going to review our mistakes and keep a running list of mistake types. Every time we make a mistake which we feel we haven't really done before, we should write it down, and more importantly, write down our conclusion of how to avoid it. And we should keep updating our practical tips list from before. Actually, we should most of its content should come from this section, from actually practicing, because while we're practicing, we're going to be seeing what works and what doesn't. So this is what a 2-day mini schedule looks like for each topic. So for triangles and for critical reasoning and for descriptive statistics, each of these things should get 2 days. And what's left is dividing your time among the different sections in accordance with your situation. So in general, you should be planning to hit one subject every 2 days. But if you have exactly 60 days, you're going to have to fit a few topics into 1 day. So these should be topics that you find easier because it's not quite enough time. If you have a little bit more, like 65 days, you'll be able to literally do 2 days for each and every topic. So in addition to this subject review, you're also, in parallel, you're going to be creating a daily routine of magazine reading magazine articles. I recommend economics magazines, popular science, or light social science, and going over your vocabulary and memorization lists. And if you're not, it is really essential, right? Because in order to cope with the verbal section, it should take at least an hour to an hour and a half daily. So schedule that too. Don't leave it just for chance when you have the time. Schedule an hour in the evening or in the morning when you do this. And take 1 day off a week. You're going to need it, okay? I know you all want to work hard and you have a lot of ambition, but give yourself a day off a week. So following these 47 days, this is a good question. Can I suggest names of magazines? Yeah, I personally would suggest The Economist, for example, or the Popular Science magazine, or perhaps The New Yorker, although that's a little bit harder. It's a high level, but if you can handle it, then all the better. Or The Atlantic, or the New York Times magazine, or anything that you find personally interesting. If you're into sports, then read Sports Illustrated or something like that. Or something to do with your interest. If it's a high quality magazine or news outlet, that's fine. You should read it because it's really a great way to study and work on our test. The Scientific American. I'm not personally familiar with it. I don't know. But if it's a good magazine, then it should be fine. I was referring to Popular Science, which I know, or National Geographic also. Anyway, so after these 47 days, you should have 3 days that are unscheduled for the simple reason that you can never really know what might come up during these 47 days that are going to make you have to delay some part. And that's what you should have these unscheduled days for. Okay? Following this, we're in the home stretch, the last 10 days, days 51, 58 about. Now these days should be devoted to 2 things. The first is review. So every other day you should be going over 2 or 3 major topics. What does this entail? It entails fundamentally reviewing the sections or the subject matters that the practice tests have shown you are problematic for you, and going over your material summary, your list, which you've been writing, compiling all throughout your studies, the goal being to get to the point at which this list bores you because all of the tips in it are just like obvious. Like, obviously, when I solve triangles, I will use this and this formula. That's the goal. And finally, you should be going, that was your material summary. You should be going over the practical tips list as well. This as well, you should be so familiar with it, it should be boring you. And your mistakes list. Here again, the goal isn't not only to understand all your mistakes, or you can look at the mistake and say to yourself, oh yeah, I see why I made this mistake. I made this mistake because I confused volume for surface area, but rather you should be confident you can avoid repeating. So you should be saying to yourself, when I see volume, I'll automatically write down the function for volume, and that will make me not confuse it later on in the question for surface area, for example. So this is the first thing you should be doing these last 10 days. And the second thing is you should be taking practice tests. So on every other day, which isn't devoted to review, so if you're reviewing every odd day, then every even day you should be taking practice tests, by which I mean the GMAT CATs, which are the most serious practice tests out there. And you should be taking them from start to finish. If you can take a few days off of work so you're free, then the best thing is to take the test at the exact same hour that your real test is going to be. And then after that, if it's in the morning, you should spend your afternoon reviewing it, okay? And if you have time left after reviewing it, then spend the rest of the day for solving additional questions that are similar to the ones you got wrong, either on examPAL or in the official guide, and figuring out how not to repeat similar mistakes. On day 59, or the day before the test, you should take it off and relax, breathe, maybe reach out to some people you've been ignoring for the past 2 months. And most importantly, whatever you do, don't get too crazy, get a good night's sleep. Following that is the test day, in which you will ace the GMAT, because if you have done everything I said, you will be fully prepared. So just to kind of go back to John Doe we started with, and whose test we just described in detail, whose schedule rather, let's take a peek at what his weekly schedule actually looks like with this plan. So as you can see here, he studies a total of 3 hours a day on weekdays, which is in the morning he studies between 8 and 8:30, and then he studies between 5 and 8:30, so it's a little bit more than 3 hours. It's 4 hours a day on weekdays. And then on the weekend, he studies more than that. He studies from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So that's 9 hours, right? But he has enough time, and during the rest of the time he's working, but he has enough time for other pursuits as well. He goes to the gym 3 times a week. He has social events one time a week, and he takes all of Saturday off. So if he duplicates this for another 7 weeks, this is enough time to study comprehensively over a 2-month period with the whole 100 to 120 hours, even given all the time he takes off here. So the point, of course, isn't that your plan will look exactly like this, but this is a general outline. And if this is more or less what your weekly schedule can look like, meaning you're working, but you can spend a few evenings a week working on it and some more time on the weekend, then a 2-month plan can work for you. And once again, we recommend it. This is a good time for questions, guys, if you have any, because I'm going to be hopping into to the next topic right now, which is talking about a 30-day study plan. So feel free to ask questions, but in the meanwhile, I'll keep going. So all of this is good and well up till now, but what if you don't have 2 months? Say you suddenly decided you're gonna take the GMAT or you're gonna apply to an MBA, and you have to take it in 30 days. So if this is the case for you, then this is hard, but it is possible. Even if you have a job and you can't devote your entire life to studying. Say, for example, you're someone like Larry, who also has a full-time job. But unlike John Doe from before, Larry Rowe is prepared to devote his evenings and his weekends entirely. Okay, so he has 3 hours he's going to study every weekday, and he's going to aim for studying 14 hours over the weekend. Not on one day, but over the entire weekend. So if Larry's prepared to work hard, and if you have 1 month and you're also willing to work hard, then while this may be difficult, it is possible, and let's talk about how. The cons of the situation of taking a test in 1 month are pretty obvious, right? There's a lot of pressure, and it's going to be quite hard to find a work-study balance. Let's just say you're not going to be too much fun over the next couple of weeks. That being said, though, and even though we don't recommend doing this on purpose, if this is a situation that you're in, there are a few pros, which is studying in such a short time. It means that you're going to be fresh and you're going to be sharp. You're not going to have enough time to forget much. People who study for a much longer time, at a certain point, have to start reviewing material that they've studied before because they start forgetting. You're not going to have to do that. And plus, examPAL automatically feeds you questions that actually incorporate material you've already done. For example, when you do our coordinate geometry section, and the questions in it repeat the principles of triangles, quadrilaterals, circles, and polygons. What this means is that you're constantly revising and reviewing even as you're learning new material. So in each topic, we incorporate ideas and tools from previous topics so that you're naturally progressing. So if this is what you're gonna do, you should say goodbye to your friends and family, tell them you're gonna talk to them in a month, and let's start planning. Juan asks, what is the best study plan when you haven't scheduled a test? Well, first of all, I do recommend a scheduled test before committing really to any study plan, because it helps. Otherwise, a common phenomenon we are familiar with is people who just kind of study and study, and they keep studying for months and months because they don't have a test date, and they kind of say to themselves, I'll schedule it when I'm ready. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend setting a test date, building a plan towards it, and then you'll have motivation and commitment to actually study and do it. And remember, most test dates, you can change them up to, I think, 16 days before. Not for free, but you can. So I do recommend doing that. That being said, if still this is what you want to do and you don't have a scheduled test, I recommend 2 months. This is what we recommend. This is the ideal amount of time. Thanks for the question, Juan. If anyone else has any more questions like that, hit me. So let's jump into the 30-day study plan. This is what it consists of. Daily study, okay? With 30 days to go, we don't really have the luxury of too many days off. However, once again, we have to be realistic and think of all the non-GMAT days, non-GMAT things rather, that you have to do over the next month, and we will be able to schedule around them. If there are a few non-GMAT things, this plan can still work. If there are lots and lots, maybe we should go back to the 60-day plan or some combination of the two, of course. So even though we don't have a lot of time, we still do advise you to take a day off every week. It's important. And if you're already taking it off, do something fun. So here we're going to do in 20 days what we did before in 47 days. Okay? In these 20 days, we're going to review all the tests material. So as we did in plan before, we're going to make a list of all the topics, and we're going to plan a mini schedule for one, except this time it's going to be about one subject per day. Once again, if you have exactly 30 days, there are going to be a few topics which you're going to have to fit into into one day, so more than one topic a day for a few topics. If you have a few more than days, 35 or so, you should actually have time each topic one day. So what's left, as with before, is dividing your time between the different sections in accordance with your situation. Every day you should be planning to work on a different schedule, and this is how I recommend your day should look. In the morning, or at least in the beginning of your studies, whenever they are in the day, you should review the material, okay? During which, of course, once again, we're going to keep updating list of material summary and working on our practical tips list, and also going over these. And in the afternoon, or in whatever later part of the day it is, we're going to be solving problems that have to do with the same topic. So in the day, we'll learn about, the Pythagoras theorem and other things that have to do with triangles, what an isosceles is, and so on. And in the afternoon, we will solve questions, which on examPAL means we're going to be doing the practice phase. Once again, not forgetting to review our mistakes and update our lists. All right? In addition, even though we're stressed for time, once again, we also have to leave ourselves with time to work on our verbal skills, our reading and our vocabulary, and our memorization. And part of the way we do that is reading, and part of the ways we do that is going over our lists of words to memorize, which we will find on the site. This leads us to our last 10 days, the money time. And here, as we did before in the 2-month plan, we're going to be doing two things. Every other day, odd days, we're going to be reviewing topics, which means we're going to be working on the most problematic parts of the topics, things we've seen that we're bad in or that we need to work on. We're going to be going over our material summary, which we've been compiling for the past 20 days, going over our practical tips list, which we've been compiling, going over our mistakes list, which we've been compiling, and making sure we really understand these things well. And on every even day, we're going to be taking a practice test. And here, once again, we should be spending, doing it when we can, and spending the rest of the day, other than the practice test, analyzing. There's a question here, don't we need to memorize only for GRE? The answer is no, not really. For GRE, it is definitely true that for GRE, it's much more important to memorize, and there is much more to memorize. In GRE, the vocabulary is at a higher level. But for the GMAT as well, we do incorporate in our course, we do recommend working on your vocabulary and memorizing. Not because there are questions about vocabulary per se, there aren't any in GRE either. There aren't questions about what does this word mean, but simply to understand some of the reading comprehension, we need to have a fairly high level of vocabulary. And for that reason, this is part of the test. I don't know much about the IELTS, so I can't comment on that question, Juan. So here, as with our 60-day plan, the day before the test, we should take off and have some fun, which we probably haven't been having for a few weeks. Give ourselves a light and early dinner, and once again, get a good night's sleep. Okay, and on test day, do what you've been studying to do. So if we look at Larry's plan, Larry's schedule, then as you can see, it's quite a bit tighter than John's. He goes straight from studying in the morning to work to studying in the evening, and he fits both a topic review and practice in the same evening. And while Larry, on the one hand, does also give himself an entire day off, which is important to do, on the other day, in the weekend, he really studies from dawn to dusk. Not half a day, but a full day, and he manages to fit in 3 separate topics. So this is not easy, but with 30 intense days, he will be prepared for the test, and you can as well if you do something like this. So that's what a 30-day study plan looks like. Can I quickly review the components of a 90-day study plan? That is a great question. Thank you very much for that question. So what about the other extreme? What if we have very little time in our daily schedules to devote to studying, but on the other hand, we can postpone the test for a bit? And in this case, it might make sense to look at a 90-day plan. And this plan will make sense for someone like Tammy. Okay, and Tammy is a first-time test taker, but she has a really, really busy life. Okay, she can set aside only 2 hours of studying in the evening, but only 3 times a week during the work week. And she can't take off any work before the test. She can study significantly more on the weekends, but a month in, she has a family vacation, and a month after that, she has to take a week off because she has to prepare a presentation at work. And the time pressure is what's pushed her to go for a 90-day plan in the first place. And since she's starting from scratch, she's not sure which topics she's better at, and she wants to budget an equal amount of time for all subjects. So before we describe how her plan and your plan will look like, let's reiterate. This plan is meant for those of you who are extremely busy. It's not recommended if your goal is simply to study a lot and you think that the more time studying, the better. The truth is 3 months is a long time study for the GMAT, and it's probably too long. But what I mean by this is the concern is that by the time you've wrapping up your studies, you will have forgotten a good deal of what you've studied. And at a certain point, studying becomes exhausting and it becomes less effective. And for all these reasons, studying for so long really isn't necessary. Remember, you should be aiming for 100 or 120 hours of study time, or 130, 150 if you're not a native English speaker. Over 3 months, this is barely an hour per day. This is really very low intensity studying. And thus, it really only makes sense if you have very little time during the day and just spread your studies out over. If it's not the case, once again, it may make sense for you to delay your study, even if you want to take it in 3 months from now, but this isn't the case for you, it might make sense for you to delay your studies by a month, and in a month start the 60-day plan, which is the optimal amount of time. Another relevant scenario is one we've already mentioned. If you're a non-native speaker and you need to brush up on your language skills, then we recommend taking an upcoming month to work on your language skills. Devote basically all the time you have each day to reading magazine articles and working on your language skills, and following that, begin your 60-day study plan, which we've already discussed. One more note, if you are going to go for the 90-day plan, it's a good idea to find someone else who's taking it and make him your real-life examPAL. This is definitely recommended with the other plans as well, but here I would say it's essential because it's really important to be going through this with someone. Otherwise, we can, lose our sanity a little bit. So you should be meeting with this person once or twice a week to study, or at the very least, just to have coffee and discuss your mutual progress, what you're doing right, what maybe you're having trouble with. And really, this makes studying both more enjoyable and more efficient. Okay? There's a question here about the study templates. So the answer is pretty much what I've described so far is a sort of template, and you will have access to it afterwards. You're going to have, we're going to send you a recording of this webinar, and on our site we have a blog post on this topic, or actually we have separate blog posts for each of the 3 study plans, 30, 60, 90 days, and there you can find an actual template tool which you can use to build your schedule. So, how to make most of 90 days. So the general structure of the plan is similar to the previous plans, but of course it's more spread out. So what this means is here we spend no less than 77 days studying the material. And what this means is that here we're going to be building a 3-day mini schedule for each subtopic. On the first day, we're going to study the fundamental material, of course, keeping our lists going. And on the second day, we're going to be practicing subject-related questions. On the third day, we can review. We'll go over our mistakes from the day before, and this is why it's important to have a mistakes list, which we keep updating. And from the conclusions from these mistakes, we're going to both update the list and actually go back and study things that we need in order to not make these mistakes again. Following these 77 days, we should once again leave a few days unscheduled because, as we said, you never know what it'll be, and you want to have time to move things to if something comes up. And in the last 10 days, as we've done with the previous study plans, we should, on the odd days, be reviewing the material, and on the even days, we should be taking practice tests. Day before the test, as you should be expecting at this point, you should really take it off, and on the day of the test, you should ace it. So given all the above, this is what a week in Tammy's plan looks like. As you can see, she only studies for about an hour and a half or 2 hours on most weekdays after work from 7 to 9. But that's only on a few weekdays. She has several other obligations during the week. And on the weekend, she only studies half a day, one of the days. And then she takes the rest of the day off. So even given all these other constraints, these other non-GMAT things that Tammy's doing, she will fit all the necessary material in 90 days. And you will too if you do a similar plan. And you will arrive at the test day both fresh and ready. So we have a few more points I want to make, but I'll just take a question real quick. Sru asks, you're planning for 30-day plan. If you get the examPAL plan, is it going to be like going through the material? How will it help me? I guess I'll tackle this in the end because I do want to tackle a few more things here in the next 5 minutes. But the answer is it's both going through the material and also working on your skills. I'll try and answer you in a few minutes when we're done. So whichever study plan you take, there are a few additional tips I want to leave you guys with, which are always relevant. When you're studying, silence is golden. Your phone should be silenced, and it should be in a different room, and it should be under a pillow. Your browser, if you're studying on a computer, which I recommend doing, your browser should have no other tabs open, not news, not YouTube, not Facebook. You should be open on preferably examPAL.com, and you need to find a study space without too many other people. No need to go to the fridge every 20 minutes to see if there have been any updates since the last time you visited. If you're having trouble grasping something, and we all do sometimes, you need to ask yourself, why am I having trouble grasping it? What is the problem I'm having? If it's something small, don't get hung up on it. Push it to the review days. This is what you have them for. If it's something fundamental, if you feel like there's something in the material which you really don't understand, then you should give it more time, prolong the time devoted to it, and shorten time given to some other subject. This is fine if you're going to do other subjects somewhat faster. However, by no means should you erase any subject from your schedule. Even one that you feel confident about, you should still go over at least briefly. Being good at something is nice, but we want to be great. Remember while studying that mistakes are opportunities. We all hate making mistakes. Believe me, I do too. But we should be asking ourselves, after every mistake, why did it happen? What do we need to do differently? As I've said many times already today, you should be keeping a running list of different mistake types, examples of these mistake types, and tips on how to avoid these mistakes later off. You're better off doing 500 questions in total and really understanding them than doing 10,000 questions, that is, robotically. Get 8 hours of sleep every night. It's important. And exercise is highly recommended. So that's pretty much what I have to say to you guys here today. And before we finish, I want to say thank you for participating in our webinar and present you with a special offer for you and you guys only. For the next 48 hours, our examPAL packages are 25% off. Go to examPAL.com, claim the offer. You should be getting a link to your email right after this webinar when we conclude. Keep in mind also, if you've already taken the GMAT, you will be eligible for our Success Guarantee program, which I mentioned in the beginning, where we guarantee 70 points improvement. So that's it, guys. I hope this helped how you think of your upcoming weeks and months prior to the test. And as I mentioned, we have a blog post which also has a lot of the same material here and has a template tool, which you should check out. And you should be receiving in your inbox a recording this webinar. So if I was too fast or you want to go over it again, you can do so at your leisure. And I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes to answer questions you guys have and haven't asked yet, or you guys think of. So once again, though, thank you, everybody, for being with here today. And I hope to see you in future webinars and on examPAL.com, where we're always there answering questions. If you go to examPAL.com even now, even without signing in, on the bottom right corner, there's a chat button. You can ask a question. And believe me, someone will answer, and there's not a bad chance it'll be me. So I hope to see you there. All right, now to some of you guys' questions through. Maybe you can give me a little more details what you actually mean. Is it going to be like going through the material? Well, no, it isn't going to be just like going through the material. At the beginning, the first kind of 10 minutes, I was talking about what we do in the examPAL course, and it's a lot more than going through the material. We watch for each topic. There's a video that's just about the material. Then there's another video that's about answer strategies for that specific topic. And then we move on to the practice, in which we have practice questions that relate to the material, but we study you throughout the practice. We ask you what answer strategies you're using, and at a certain point in the optimization phase of the practice, you see questions which have been picked for you and answer explanations, which are specifically the tools that we recommend you use. So that's what you get with the examPAL plan, whatever plan you're doing, which is 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days. That's what you get on examPAL. Michael Bragg asks, can we explain the practical tips list? Yes, for sure. Say you're studying and I'll just give an example. Say you're studying and you finish a question and you just kind of like, whoa, I got this question right, even though I know I knew the answer. Why did that happen? Oh, I clicked on C even though I knew it was B. That's a silly mistake. I won't make it again. So you should pause and ask yourself, what can you do to not make that happen? And it can be something really just as simple as writing down on your piece of paper A, B, C, D, E, and each time you eliminate a question, cross it out, and then you'll see visually what the answer is in the end, and make sure you pick the right answer and not just click wrong. So that's a pretty simple and straightforward example. There are ones that are much more specific. You solve a question that has to do with rate and work, and you solved it precisely. And then in examPAL, we gave you an explanation of how to solve it alternatively, and you checked it out, and you say to yourself, wow, that was actually way easier. And then your practical tip from that is, when I have a question, say, that has a variable both in the question and in the answers, I'm much better off plugging in a number, saying just x equals 1, y equals 2, than trying to solve it precisely. That's also a practical tips. So basically, it's very general, but it's anything that while you're studying, a conclusion that you reach that that is something that will improve your performance later on. So that's what your practical tips list should be. Do we help you identify the mistakes for the mistakes list? Well, yeah, yes and no. Yes, first of all, when you're practicing, you immediately get feedback on what your mistakes are. And we also ask you why you made these mistakes, that's really what the mistakes list is about, because it's about identifying types of mistakes. So you're going to be forced to think about, wait, did I make this mistake because it's just a calculation mistake, or did I make it because I was using the wrong tool entirely? So we do all of that. That being said, though, you have to also put in your own kind of thinking into it and your own insight, and say to yourself, well, now I've already 3 times already I've made a mistake in which I've gotten confused between percents and fractions, and I realize that this is a type of mistake. This is something that repeats itself, and I should treat it as such. And then that might not be something that we'll be able to identify in the same way that you will, although actually we might identify it and not even really tell you with words, but rather the system will see there's a certain pattern and will feed you questions that will help you work on it. But still, the list itself is one you need to think about and build from your experience. And what's a good example on how to make this list? So really, just every mistake, when you finish it, ask yourself, why did I make this mistake? And if the answer is, and have a specific answer, not like I got confused, but specifically, I got confused between percents and fractions. And if it's an answer that you've already said, if it's the first time you've said this answer, add it to your list. And if it's the second time you made it, then don't add it to your list, but go to the thing that's already on your list and update it, and think about how what is your practical tip on how to not repeat this mistake. Sru is asking, can I continue for 4 to 5 hours a day if I can afford or more, but will I be able to access the material completely? I think you're asking about examPAL.com. If you are, then yeah, the answer is yes. On examPAL, if you sign up for a course, you have access to everything. But everything you do, you have like credits and you use them. So there's no cap on time, but there is a cap on like some of the different actions you can do. But that being said, though, if you've watched something and you want to rewatch it, you credits. So yeah, basically you will be able to access the material completely for the entire time you're studying, with nothing stopping you. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? If you do, and I don't have time to answer them, then once again, we're there on examPAL.com. Feel free to ask. You can even ask in a question for Dave, and then I'll definitely be the one answering it. And that's it, guys. So once again, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon in a future webinar. For now, signing off. See you guys soon.